Uh, well, welcome to the beginning of our series, Simple Life. Obviously, as you look around, the goal is to take a moment to just strip everything down, the worship, the way we do everything, and just get down to the bare bones of what's really, really, truly important. I really feel like this is a pivotal series, not for just our church, but for our society, for any church. And so hopefully today you're ready to engage this topic. Hopefully you're rested and you're focused and you're not coming off a bad date, and then you'll be able to pay attention. But here's the reality. Most of us aren't ready, are we? Like, let's just be honest. We're busy. Most of us make it to Sunday, and we're totally shot. We barely make it there in the first place, and we're completely shot. And we're not ready to engage because we're scheduled too tight. And I'm wrestling through this in my own life. What does it look like to simplify my life? And you know, what is the stuff that you can let go of and the stuff you can't? What time do you need to surrender, and what time do you need to protect? And kind of, this is just for me, my family, and the Lord. And all of us get a day off, at least at some point, right? But we know when we get our day off that it's not really off, right? Like, time marches on. Regardless, even if it's our day off, it's always ticking. It never stops. So let me ask you this, and I want you to be really honest with me, because basically, well, let me help you. If you don't raise your hand, you're probably not telling the truth. Okay, so how many, by raise of hand, get your hands ready, get warmed up, are stressed with the pace of your life? Right? I mean, you wish you had more time for yourself. You wish you had more time for your family, right? Are we there? Now, listen, the reality is we should all have plenty of time because we all get the same amount. C.S. Lewis says this way: the future is something that everyone reaches at the rate of 60 minutes per hour. We're all going the same speed, but it doesn't feel that way. If you're anything like me, my life doesn't feel like it's going 60 minutes per hour. It feels like it's going 60 miles per hour, right? Maybe faster. It feels like life is flying by. Time is we're just trying to hold on. And the world around us, the society we live in, our culture, doesn't help. It pushes us to the limits. Achieve more, do more, accomplish more. You know, the pace of life is increasing exponentially. We're going at breakneck speed. You know, and so we read scriptures, or we hear scriptures like Psalm 46:10, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." And we just go, well, I'm never going to know God because I haven't been still in years, right? And we go, how am I going to, I don't have context for that at all. An example is kids in sports. My son Truett is in football right now, which means my life is not my own. But we want him to have these experiences and this and that. But parents, tell me if you haven't done this, right? The weather gets stormy, and that practice or that game is canceled. And on the outside, you're like, oh, buddy, so sorry. And inside, you're like, sweet, got a night at home, right? Richard Swinson talks about this in his book, Overload Syndrome. Here's what he says: there are only so many details that can be comfortably managed in anybody's life. And once this number has been exceeded, one of two things happens: disorganization or frustration. Now, how many of you are living in one or both of those, right? And yet, we manage more and more details every year, often at exponential rates. We have to deal with more things per person than ever before in the history of humankind. Every year we have more products, we have more information, more technology, more activities, more choices, more change, more traffic, more commitments, more work. In short, we have more of everything. And this ubiquitous overloading leads to an increased overload in life, speed, change, stress, and complexity. Anybody relate to that? Like, this is my life sometimes. If I'm honest at all, we're a world with no margin. We have virtually no extra space. This is a hard series for me to preach because God is continually working on me about this topic. You might say, what exactly is margin? Well, we did a whole series on margin, so if this interests you, you can go back and catch that on iTunes or on our webpage. But margin we defined as this. We went to Webster's Dictionary, and it's defined three ways. The number one is the blank space bordering the printed area on a page. That's what we think of, right? It's the white around the edge. But listen to these other two. These are powerful. Number two is the limit beyond which something is acceptable. And number three, the amount available beyond what is needed. In other words, margin is what we have when we have more than enough. Does that sound unfamiliar to anybody? Margin is when we have more than enough. So when you apply this to our lives, apply this to time, this is when you have a day or two with nothing planned. and your home with your family. You have time to invest in your kids. You have time to spend time with the Lord. So margin is basically what we don't have. It's what none of us have, right? We need that blank space, that place to breathe. So this goal over the next 3 weeks is that this short series, My Simple Life, would be that. It would be for you a spiritual, deep breath where you can pause and look at life. And again, I'm not speaking out of what I know, I'm speaking out of what I'm learning. Because I'm right there with you. In order to move towards simplicity, we've got to have this margin. And so today I want to talk to you about how to discover that in your time. How do we get more time? Would anybody like more time? I would. So how do we get it? Well, turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. The Bible actually tells us. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, page 395, if you're using the Warehouse Bibles. If you didn't bring your Bible and you want to follow along, raise your hand. The ushers will bring you a Bible. You can turn to page 395 and follow along. If you don't own a Bible, please raise your hand. Take this. It's our gift. Just keep it. It's yours. You got to have God's Word in your life. But let me give you a little background here. It's believed that King Solomon wrote this. King Solomon was King David's son. He was arguably the wisest and wealthiest king that's ever lived, ever. Okay, so he had everything. He knew this guy had it all together. And yet, here's this guy with everything the world could ever offer, and the very first line he writes in Ecclesiastes is this: everything is meaningless. Okay, this is a guy who's lived his life. He had everything. He did everything. And he's old, and he's looking back on all that he lived for, all that he achieved, all that he accomplished, and he's going, you know what? Everything between my birth and death was pretty much meaningless. Like, I was in a vain pursuit. Man is in a vain pursuit to fill his life with what he thinks matters. And I got to the end of my life, I realized it doesn't. It doesn't matter. Not only does it not matter, it doesn't last. And as we get to chapter 3, he paints this picture of what I want to call a well-balanced life. And that's what we're going to look at, starting with verse 1, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, page 395. And Solomon says this: for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. And he doesn't just leave that vague. He jumps in verses 2 through 8 now with 14 pairs or doublets, kind of a poetic way to walk through life and say, look at all these experiences. For everything there's a season. So let's look at verses 2 through 8. He says this: there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. This is a beautiful, haunting, poetic passage. You can't help but sense like the rhythm and the cadence and the poetry and the flow of these verses. And it kind of comes to a pinnacle in verse 11 where he says this: yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. God makes all things beautiful in His time. And I read that passage, I don't know about you, I'm going, I want that. I want that life. I want my life to ebb and flow like that. I want there to be the right season. I want my life to be under God's control and not my control. But if I'm honest, I'm not always there. I'm guessing you're not either, right? Most of us, we read that, and this is more like our lives. There's a time for everything, and it's right now. Like, I got 3 kids in sports. I got one that's playing the piano, and I got to get an oil change in my car. I need to go home and clean my house for life groups, because what if people saw my house was messy? And I got bills to pay. I got a meal to prepare. I got to get ready for the big weekend plans, and that's just what I have to do before dinner, right? And if you're like me, you can fall into the trap of actually being proud of that. Like, we begin to feel a false sense of worth and value based on how busy we are. Look how important I am. Look how much I have to do. I'm needed. I have no time, I'm so busy. And we can begin to go, that's where my worth comes from. But we get that busy, and the result is our lives do not ebb and flow. They are anything but beautiful. Instead of that ebb and flow, we're underwater. We need a snorkel, right? We need scuba gear to live our lives. And when you're that underwater, you're looking back and you're going, how do I ever get this simple living from where I'm at? And here's the key: managing time biblically. How do we manage time in a God-honoring biblical way? And so that's what we're going to dive into today. If you are overstressed, if you have no margin, we're going to give you 3 words today. We're going to extract 3 words, 3 key words from this passage to help you move towards simplicity. But let's look at the passage first. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, going on in verses 9 through 15. Because now Solomon's laid this groundwork. Now listen to where we go here. What do people really get for all their hard work? I've seen the burden God has placed on us all. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded, there's nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear Him. What's happening now has happened before, and what will happen in the future has happened before, because God makes the same things happen over and over and over again. So, let's extract 3 key words out of this. In fact, I want you to memorize these words. They're really important. They are no, no, and go. Okay? So, let's say them together. Ready? No, no, and go. So now turn to your neighbor and say, hey, if you want to know the key to time management, no, no, and go. Turn and say that to each other. No, no, go. Okay, so now you've got it. Thanks for coming. Oh, wait, let's unpack those. Let's look a little deeper, okay? Let's break these down. Number 1, no. Know who controls our time. If you want to be in control of things, if you want to have a simple life, you need to know who controls your time. And here's a hint. It's not you. Like, you know that if you've ever tried to control your time. Does anybody have enough time? Have you figured out how to pause time? Have you figured out how to get everything done? No matter how much we want to harness it and control it, we're not in control, right? Let me give you an example so you can laugh at me. A couple years ago, we just said Phil's on a Zambia trip. A couple years ago, I went with him, with my wife, on that Zambia trip, and we had flown from here to Minneapolis to Washington, D.C., and then we were spending the night in Washington, D.C., and we were going to fly out early next morning for Zambia. So we get in, and it's right about dinner time. We're kind of hungry. We want to, get into our hotel, get something to eat. So I call the shuttle, and the shuttle says, go to this stop number 15 or whatever it was, and look for the van. We're going to send the van. It's going to have this written on the side, the name of our hotel written on the side. Okay, so we hang up. We go, and they said they'd be there in 15 minutes. So we go, and we're waiting in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I'm like, I don't have time for this. So I call them back, and I say, all right, here's the deal. We've been waiting here for 30 minutes. And the lady says, oh, we sent a van. And I said, we've been here for 30 minutes. The van with this on the side never showed up. She said, oh, we sent a different van. I said, that would have been good to know. Could you please send another van, and could you please tell me what it's going to say on the side? So, okay, I'm so sorry. We're going to send this van out. It's going to have this on the side. By the time she messed up again. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not bitter. But by the time it all went down, it had been over an hour. And we're finally at our hotel that's probably 10 minutes from the airport. Okay? So we get in there. We get into the lobby. We kind of dump our stuff in our rooms. We go down, and I say, can we please get a shuttle to this restaurant that's like a mile away? And the same lady says to me, oh, I'm sorry. The shuttle ended 5 minutes ago. Wait, it gets better. If you'd been here earlier, you could have used the shuttle. And I said, if you'd sent the right shuttle, I'd have been here earlier. And I thought to myself, I don't have time for this, right? So we have to take a cab, and I'm ticked, and I'm like, this is dumb. And here's the funniest part. We had nowhere to be that night, right? Our flight was in the morning. We had all the time in the world. But have you ever felt that like that? I don't have time for this. I'm fairly convinced that most of the time when we're mad, it's about this. It's because we feel like people are wasting our precious time, right? Whether it's traffic, whether it's standing in line at the grocery, I don't have time for this, right? I'm too busy for this. I got so much going on in my life. I don't have time for this garbage, which is really unfortunate because, listen, most of what God does, He does through interruptions. He interrupts our life to remind. I think He does it just to be like, hey, just a reminder, you're not in control, right? Listen to verse 9 and 10 again. What do people really get for all their hard work? I've seen the burden God has placed on us all. Let me break that down. God's in control, you're not. You can work as hard as you want, you can do as much as you want. God's ultimately in control. So here's a crazy idea. What if we take our schedules and we give them to God? Right? I had just had a panic attack. That makes me want to throw up all over the place, right? Because I like being in control. But listen, I know it's scary. I know it's a big deal, but God is the author of time. Should not the God who numbered your days get to determine how you spend them? Listen to Job 14:5. Man's days are determined. Many have decreed the number of his months and set limits he cannot exceed. Let me put this so that even a kindergartner can understand it. When it comes to the time of your life, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. And that's it, right? And so here, too often, we treat our time like we treat our tithes. See, there's this pesky scripture that talks about our money. We don't like that. But it says this: you're supposed to give your first fruits, your best. What comes in first? What do we often give God? Whatever's left over after we spend on ourselves, if there's any left over. It says you're supposed to give the first 10%. And we never get near close to that, do we? Now, listen, this is not about money, although if you want to tithe, I'll let you. But this is about time, because time is another resource that we hoard, just like our money. And here's what we do with our time. God says, I've given you enough time to do everything I've called you to do. So if you're not fulfilling God's call for your life, what are you doing with His time? What are you wasting it on? You want a simple life? It starts with taking a deep breath. So let's do that. And as you take a deep breath, saying this: you know what? God's in control. He's in control. I'm not in control. And you know why that's good? Because when He's in control, the hiccups can come, the interruptions can come, and I can stand back and be like, you know what? That's okay, because God's in control. He's got it. He's got this. He's in control. And that's the place where the simple life starts. I'm not in control. I'm making this complicated by trying to be in control. God's got this. He's in control. The key to the simple life here: know who's in control. Once you know that, you can take step 2, which is no. Say no until the right time. Say no until the right time. Look at verse 11. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He's planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. The key here is in His time. It says He made everything beautiful. That word beautiful can literally be translated appropriate. In other words, God has a way of making things happen at just the appropriate time or just the right time. Now, I don't know about you, it never feels that way. Ever. I'm convinced in my life that because my timing is so off, everything God does either feels too fast or too slow. But it never feels on time. Right? Am I right? Like, let me give you some examples that pertain to our church. This whole Harrisburg multi-site thing, way too fast. Okay? I tried to put God off. I tried to say no. He said, no, I want you to start it now. So we dipped our toe in the water. Somebody gave us $20,000 for that multi-site. That's kind of a hint. Okay? So then we dip another toe in the water. We got meetings with the mayor of Harrisburg. We got meetings with the school officials of Harrisburg to get into school. We got a pastor. Pastor Wayne and Teresa are on staff. They're probably in this room right now. Like, this is real, folks. This is happening. I'm sitting here going, whoa, way too fast, right? But it's God's perfect time. On the flip side of that is this building. We're raising money to expand this building. And most of the expansion we're doing is for our children's ministry. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And I'm feeling like real pressure. Okay, not perceived pressure, like real pressure. 2 weeks ago, during this service, our kids ministry, which is squeezed into about 2,000 square feet, had 95 children in it. We were hanging them off coat hooks. Okay, I mean, not really, but I mean, you can check the camera. We're treating them good, but it felt like that. We just 95 kids. Imagine a 2,000 square foot house, and you put 95 children in it. Would you want to be the babysitter? No. So this is real, right? And so we started raising funds and very promptly got to half of it. And then it really has slowed down. And the growth hasn't. And I'm going, God, hello, have you not seen the kids' ministry? And of course I want it to be done like this. And what I have to remember is that if God wanted me to have the money today, He could have somebody write the check. But God's timing is perfect, and He will lay it on the right hearts at the right time. It's just not my time. So here's what I want you to hear in all that. There's an appropriate time for everything, which means there's also a wrong or an inappropriate time. If it's the proper time for crying, for mourning, like a funeral. It's probably not the time to tell a joke, break into laughter, right? There are times when we should keep our mouth shut. We should stay silent. And then there are those moments where you know God is telling you, speak up. And if he's telling you to speak up, it is wrong not to. If it is the time to speak, it is the wrong time to stay silent. And this is true in every area of life. Listen, there's a proper time for intimacy and sexuality. According to Scripture, that's within the confines of marriage, which means outside the confines of marriage is what? The wrong time. Did you know there's a right time to have stuff? Guess when it is? After you do the hard work and have the cash in hand. But what do we like to do? I don't want to do the hard work, so we charge it. Get ourselves into debt, turn our whole lives upside down because we're not willing to wait, except the problem is we haven't done the hard work, so it's not the right time. There is a right time and a wrong time for everything. And simple living is simply the wisdom to discern. Is this the right time or the wrong time to say no? The problem is we rarely feel like saying no. Because our perspective on time is way off. We want it now. What we don't understand is how short this life really is. Listen, James 4:14. What? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a while and then vanishes. We have the wrong perspective of time. And the key to the simple life is, listen, I've only got so much time to get this God stuff done. That's what I'm here for. And the wisdom about this life is knowing how to spend that time. Jesus was the best at that. Okay? You read a story in John chapter 7. And the disciples are watching Jesus do all these miracles, right? And they're like, this is awesome. And so they say, Jesus, we got to take the show on the road, man. If we go to Jerusalem, you start doing all this stuff, people start seeing it, everybody's going to believe. It's going to be in the newspaper by the weekend. You're going to convert all of Jerusalem in the weekend. Let's go. And listen to Jesus' response in John chapter 7, verse 6. Therefore, Jesus told them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. Now, that's an easy verse to overlook, but this is one of those verses that make us go, oh, snap. Jesus is ticked. Because listen to what he says. Listen, this is what he really does. He says, I've been praying. I'm connected with God. I know my time's not yet here. But see, you guys, you're so impulsive, you think any time's the right time. Doesn't that sound like our culture? Why not now? If it feels good, do it, you know? And he's like, you guys are so impulsive, you think any time's the right time. And people are like, dang, you know, because he just slammed them. You're so impulsive. You need maturity. You need to figure this stuff out. You need wisdom and discernment about how to spend your time. See, I have this theory about the spiritual life. You first become a Christian. Let's say you become a Christian for like a week, okay? You say yes to God and no to everything else. So here's how it looks. Yes, I want Jesus in my life. Well, hey, why don't you get into a Bible study? Oh, no, I'm not ready for that. Well, why don't you go on this mission trip? Ooh, no, that's a lot of money. Okay, well, let's pray together. No, I'm not really comfortable, right? And that's spiritual immaturity, and that's normal because you just accepted Christ. You got some growth, right? The problem is we start to mature, and we think maturity is switching from no to yes. And so we end up like this guy. Watch this. I think we become spiritual yes men, right? We think maturity is saying yes. So somebody says, hey, you want to be in your 97th Bible study? Yes. How could I say no? That's such a good thing. Hey, will you lead this fourth ministry? Yes. How could I not? It's such a good thing. Hey, will you give to this and this and this and this? Yes. And we just say yes to everything. And our lives become cluttered and we become overloaded and we get burned out and we wonder why the church hated us so much. Listen, maturity is not about saying yes. Maturity is about knowing when to say yes and no. That's what it's spiritual wisdom. This is the key to the simple life. And Satan knows that, and he tries to clutter your life because he knows how hard a time we have with this. Dr. Woodrow Kroll says, if Satan can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. Because he knows we struggle. So hear this. Let me absolve you from any guilt. I give you permission to say no. In fact, say it with me. No. That was weak. Say it with me. No. See, so we're going to do the opposite. If someone asks you to do something, and listen, if it's not the best use of your time, if it's not the best way to honor God and your family, say no. And let me give you this hint. Even if it's us asking. See, we need tons of volunteers. We need leaders in kids, first impressions, to go to Harrisburg, this, that. We want people to be getting involved. If you attend here, you should have a ministry. That's just normal. But what if you have many? Is it okay to say no? Yes, because more than we want you in 10 ministries, we want you in God's will. That's what we want for you. So listen, no is a complete sentence. You don't even need to explain it. Have the courage to say no. It's a spiritual word. No, I won't do that. If you want to move towards a simple life, you must be wise and discerning so you can say no to good things if it's not the right time. That doesn't mean you do nothing at all. It means you find the right thing. Which leads to number 3. Go. Go towards joy and significance. Now, before you take that way out of context, let me explain. The vain pursuit we are on for so many things, with our schedules out of control and everything going wild, it's all in search of personal happiness. It's all in search of personal fulfillment, but we will never find that outside of God's will for us. When we say no to good things that are in the wrong time, that leaves us free to say yes when God calls us to the right things. This is about the right thing in the right time. You know what that means? That means there's a right thing. That means there's a ministry for you. Listen to verses 12 and 13. Most people read 12, they don't read 13. Listen, it says, "So I concluded there's nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can." Hooray, right? But listen to verse 13. "And people should eat and drink," and this is important, "enjoy the fruits of their" what? Labor. "For these are gifts from God." The key is fruits of your labor. You have a role. If you attend this church and you're not in a ministry, you're missing something. Because you haven't found your labor yet. That thing God has called you to do. What is that thing? You need to get connected to that. What is God calling you? What has He laid on your heart? Because His design, His plan is not to overwhelm you. It's to fill you with contentment and gladness. That's His design. And you find that content and that gladness pursuing things that bring about God's glory, things that are significant for the kingdom. The problem is we tend to fill our lives with the wrong things. We fill our lives with things that we think will make us happy. More stuff, more money, more all of this. We think they'll make us happy, but they don't bring about the greatest joy. Not because they're bad, just because they're insignificant. Let me give you an example. Watching television. The average American watches 4.5 hours of television every day. Now, why do we do that? Most of us, it's because we get home from work, from a job we probably don't love that much, and we just want to unplug, shut down. We want to be left alone. We want to be entertained. We want to zone out. And we think we're going to make ourselves happy. Now, have you ever watched along like a 3-hour movie or watched 4 hours? You get caught up in a Law and Order marathon or whatever, and next thing you know, like 4 hours have passed. You ever stood up from that? How do you feel? Like somebody punched you in the face, right? You feel drunk, like, I don't even know what just happened, Like you have no idea because your time has been stolen, right? It's not that what you did was bad. It was just completely insignificant. It was empty. It didn't bring you joy. See, listen, there are many things in life, many substitutes that they're okay, they're just insignificant. And the writer says, listen, no. Go for joy and significance. Go for what God called you to do. God is calling us to significance. Scripture says He's put eternity in the hearts of men. He's built into us the innate desire to believe that what I am doing with my life is making a kingdom difference. It's making an impact beyond myself. It matters. And nowhere is that more true than in the local church, because the church is the hope of the world. And when you find your ministry in the church and you pour yourself out, that's where your joy and significance is found. But in order to do that, you got to say no to all the wrong things. And then you got to discover what the right thing is. And we want to help you with that process. That's what Pastor Will does. That's his whole job. So listen, bottom line, the key to more time. When you are presented with great opportunities to heap on more and more things, stop, take a deep breath, pray, and then do this. Say no until the right time. Go towards joy and significance. Find out what has God called me to do. And most important, know who's in control. Know that God is in control. We see that in verse 14. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's in control. My question as the band comes in as we end things is, do you know God's in control? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a little challenge. We're going to do an exiting offering, and right now we're going to have an altar call. And you're going to need to let go of control because all of you right now are looking at your watches, and we're over time. You just need to let go of that, right? Who hot will be there? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to open the altar. And I want to ask you a question before we do. Which of these three do you wrestle with? Maybe you wrestle with no, knowing that God is in control. Maybe you're like, you know what? I control my own life. And because I control my own life, it's out of control. And I need to place my life in God's control. Maybe for you, it's the second no. You got to say no until the right time. Maybe it's just so hard for you to say no and you're overcommitted and you're stressed. And you need to let go of some things. Maybe for you, it's go. It's going towards joy and significance. It's saying, you know what, God's got a plan for my life. He's got a call within this local church, and I haven't plugged in yet, and I need to. Maybe God's calling you to Harrisburg. Maybe He's calling you to kids ministry. Maybe you have no idea, and you just need to have a conversation with Will. Whatever it is, you just got to start going. Here's what I found. If you're struggling with number 2 or number 3, if you're struggling with saying no to people or going towards what God has for you, it's probably because you're struggling with number 1. And you haven't given God full control. Because when He has full control, it's easy to know what you're supposed to do, and it's easy to say no to everything else. But it starts with Him having control. So maybe that's where you need to be. You need to get down on your knees and you need to say, God, I need to give you better control. So we're going to open the altar. While the band sings this song, there will be an offering at the end. But here's what I want you to do. If you're going to come to the altar, I want you to pause. I want you to take off your watch. Or take your smartphone out of your pocket and give it to somebody next to you and say, give it back after this. But give it to somebody next to you. And take these moments to just let go of time. To say, it doesn't matter what time it is. I need to take 4 or 5 minutes and just beg God to work in my heart. And I need to let go of distractions to do it. So if that's you, take off your watch, take out your cell phone, whatever it is, leave it on your chair, come up here as the band sings, just take a few moments to pause and say, God, will you be in control of my life?